Hey everyone, Pastor Farney here again with our ninth and final lecture on devotional practices. We've covered quite a lot of ground in these lectures, and I hope you found some way to enrich your spiritual life and grow closer to God. Today we'll finish up with a discussion of service to our neighbor as devotion to God. Now, if you were somehow not aware, service is and has always been a central part of the church's life and practice. It is often noticed that the fifth book of the New Testament is not called the beliefs of the apostles, but the acts of the apostles. The church has always been known primarily for what her faith leads her to do. That comes, of course, from the one who founded the church, our Lord. The Gospels are stories where Jesus' teaching and actions are very tightly intertwined. I'm always surprised, really personally, when I notice that this beautiful Isaiah passage about Jesus as the suffering servant who bears our suffering, we always read this on Good Friday, right? But it's taken by the Gospel writers, not that it doesn't refer to that, but Matthew says that it refers to bearing the weight of um, of human sickness. Matthew quotes it in chapter 8 right after Jesus heals Peter's mother-in-law of her fever. That always surprises me. Jesus was constantly feeding and welcoming and healing those in need, especially those who had very little to offer in return. And so the church, after his ascension, continued works of mercy, feeding the poor, welcoming strangers, tending to the sick. It has always been a scandal of church history that those who have nothing are welcomed, exalted in the kingdom of God. The homeless are princes, the poor are kings, the sick are treasures. Sinners become children of God. There's a great story about St. Lawrence. He was serving a church in Rome, and a soldier comes in and demands that he gives up all the riches of the church to the Roman government. And he says, well, the church has many, many riches. The church is very wealthy. Will you give me a day to collect the riches of the church, and I'll turn them over to you this time tomorrow? And he says, okay, yeah, that's good. So the soldier comes back the next day, and what has Lawrence gathered but homeless lepers? And the soldier says, well, we'll get them out of the way. Where are the riches of the church? And Lawrence says, well, these are the riches of God. This is what God values. This is what he sees as the riches of the church. And so, of course, Lawrence is martyred for such a confession. The other story about him is that they decided to cook him. They decided to burn him on iron, and it's reported that while he was being burned alive, strapped to this great iron, he said, turn me over, I'm done on this side." Um, Good to see the saints having a sense of humor in death. But you understand the point of this story, and it's very hard to understand and accept, especially for those of us for whom hardship is usually light and temporary. The world tends to hate Christianity for this attitude towards the weak and the lowly. As much lip service as political establishments may give to supporting the downtrodden, when the veneer is peeled back, you quickly notice what they truly care about. When it's election season, one side that normally loves the homeless tends to get really tough on them around election season. Another party, and I won't name them, one that no longer really cares to see Christians as a key voting bloc, starts to see abortion issues as a lot more open and negotiable. I won't say more about that if I'm being recorded. But the point is clear. All avenues of political power will eventually be turned against all the things Christians hold dear. A good reminder that if we align ourselves with them, we will be betrayed when we're no longer useful. Enough on that. It's interesting to know that as the centuries went on in the church, Christians did things like creating the institution that we now know as the hospital. Now, they weren't a particularly good place to get care, and they predate by a few centuries any modern sort of medicine. But the hospitals were created as a place to care for the terminally sick in a spiritual way, as well as seeing to their physical needs. It's really only in the past few decades, as healthcare has become big business, that hospitals have moved away from their Christian roots. And you can see that in the hospitals in our town that still bear religious names, even though as my wife, she works as a nurse, as she'll tell you, patients are often referred to as customers, objects for our economic gain rather than objects of our charity. Again, a change in perspective, but an interesting historical note that the church has never felt complete without giving of itself to the world. It's an institution of the gospel, both preached and lived. And we don't do a half-bad job of that at St. Paul's either. Our school is, in some sense, that same kind of mission. But we'll talk more about that on another day. Now, of course, you probably don't have the time to start a hospital. If you do, by all means. But those big institutional things that the church does, they're very good and very helpful. But our topic today is serving in a way that in kind of selfishly enriches you spiritually. I'll take for granted you found a way that your service is enriching your neighbor physically. But how can it be an act both of service and of devotion? Well, in the first place, we could ponder the statement of St. Paul in Ephesians chapter 6. This is verse 7, where he enjoins us to serve with a good will as to the Lord and not to man. Similarly, the Lord tells us that all we do to the least of his children, we do to him, either for good or for ill. By putting God at the fore of your heart and your mind as you practice different aspects of service, it becomes eminently clear whom you are really serving, which can help if you maybe aren't crazy about the work you're doing or even the people you're doing it for. It really is a life-changing perspective to think that no matter what work you're doing, even in your day-to-day job or in raising your children, you're doing God's will for you. You're contributing to God's vision of what the world should look like, at least in this time and place. In the Garden of Eden, there was work and service, but it was joyful and perfect. Man worked for God, and it was fulfilling, productive. He set the creation in order that the Creator gave him to maintain. Now, our labors will look very different in the new heaven and new earth. There won't be any lawyers or accountants or tax collectors. There certainly won't be any pastors. All those sorts of careers born of various kinds of strife will blessedly go by the wayside, as important as they are now. But our labors, even today, are an imperfect vision of what paradise will look like, which is worth pondering. Now, to the second point here, even if you can't get it through your head how your service is a little slice of heaven, you can rest assured that God is at work in you. He works through not only imperfect, but even wicked, and even worst of all, boring means. He works through your mowing the lawn, your folding laundry. I often think about God's presence when I'm called to be in some situation where it doesn't really seem anyone wants me there or is particularly interested in having a pastor around. Even there, God is at work. There's someone there that thought it would be nice to have a pastor there, and they're the only person that thinks it's nice to have a pastor there, praying in front of people who couldn't care less. Even there, and I think especially there, God is working. And God does his work through overbaked cookies and dodgeball games with kids and in painting walls. God's a busy guy, and he's always looking for help, though I don't imagine he really needs it. And finally, if all else fails, you might use mindless, repetitive tasks as a space for free time for your mind. Let your mind wander and contemplate. Spend some time in prayer. Half of my recommendations in this class are reminders of how much free time your mind might have in a busy day for the purpose of prayer. When you're doing something that bores you out of your mind, have a chat with God. Find something to talk to him about while you're making dinner or doing the dishes, while your hands are very busy, but your mind is not. Now, when we talk about service, at least in this sense, it really is the thought that counts. Again, as much as we're worried about service as a means towards growing your faith, you don't have to move mountains to do something that helps you remember to put the needs of others before your own. You could do something as paltry as baking someone cookies or taking something off of your spouse's plate. Or you could find one of the billions of organizations looking for volunteer help, one that interests you, speaks to what you're hoping to serve. Anything that lets you give up some of your time that you might otherwise spend on your interests and your purposes, something that helps you give that up to God and your neighbor. The point is to reorient your life so that you act more like Christ in each moment of your day. The life of a Christian is fundamentally oriented first towards God and then toward others. And this is not your personal loss, but is your gain. As you join Christ in serving others, you'll find yourself closer to your Lord in that service. And so I know we had a shorter lecture today. So again, for the last time, I'm providing a simple, straightforward way for you to serve this week. I'm asking you to think of the person in your life who does the most for you, maybe your spouse or a child or a friend, and find something to do for them to make their life a little better, a little easier. Use it as an opportunity to remember the many things that God provides for you each and every day. Use it as an opportunity to honor the gift that person is in your life, the ways that God provides for you through them. Use it as a chance to pray that you would have a more open heart for serving as Christ has first served you. Just see how it goes. As always, thanks for joining us, and God bless you.